Imagine walking into a world of opulence, where the sparkle of diamonds and gold seems to promise acceptance, but instead you are met with dismissal and disregard. An elderly woman, unnoticed and ignored by the people who should value her, stands on the precipice of a life-altering decision. This is the story of Mrs. Eleanor Palmer, a woman whose quiet dignity and unassuming appearance are no match for the arrogance she faces. What happens when she decides enough is enough? Join me in uncovering a story of power, respect, and the consequences of underestimating someone based on appearances. Hi everyone, welcome to Narrated Tales, where every story touches the heart. Today I am very happy to share a new story with you. Let's get started. The bell above the door of the luxury jewelry store chimed softly as Mrs. Eleanor Palmer stepped inside. The warmth of the polished marble floor contrasted with the crisp air outside, where the wind had begun to carry the bite of winter. She paused for a moment, surveying her surroundings, the glistening displays of diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires that lined the glass cases, sparkling like little pieces of the night sky. The store was a world away from the simple life she had lived, tucked away in a modest home on the outskirts of the city. But today, Eleanor was here on a special mission. Her granddaughter's birthday was fast approaching, and Eleanor had promised her that she would find a gift that could show her how much she was loved. A gift that would be timeless, just like the bond they shared. Her eyes, though cloudy with age, still held a keen understanding of beauty, and she had seen the kind of jewelry that adorned the rich and well-to-do in magazines over the years. But the pieces before her now, carefully arranged under soft lighting, held a different kind of allure. These were not just jewels, they were symbols of something far greater: elegance, wealth, and status. Yet, despite the store's grandeur, Eleanor felt no overwhelming desire for luxury. She simply wanted something that would reflect her love for her granddaughter, a simple yet beautiful token of affection. She took a tentative step inside, her cane tapping rhythmically against the floor with each movement. She was dressed in a worn-out coat, frayed at the sleeves and shoulders, and a pair of well-used shoes. There was no mistaking that she was far from the polished clientele who frequently walked these halls. Her appearance marked her as someone who did not belong in such an opulent place. But her intention was clear. She had come to buy a gift, not to impress. The staff, scattered across the store like mannequins in a show window, took little notice of her arrival. The salespeople were busy talking amongst themselves or attending to customers who, like themselves, looked the part. They were all immaculately dressed in designer suits, their posture perfect, their expressions either unreadable or adorned with false smiles. Eleanor's presence went unnoticed, almost as if she were a shadow fading into the background. Eleanor wasn't in a hurry, but the store seemed to pulse with a sense of urgency, a pace driven by the buyers and sellers of luxury goods, each transaction a step closer to the ultimate goal: wealth and status. Eleanor, in contrast, moved deliberately, taking her time to examine the jewelry in front of her. She wasn't looking for diamonds that glistened with wealth or necklaces that could be flaunted at parties. She was searching for something else entirely. As she drifted from case to case, her attention lingered on a delicate bracelet, a simple gold band with small inset pearls. It was elegant in its simplicity, the kind of piece that could be worn every day, not just on special occasions. Eleanor imagined how her granddaughter might react when she saw it, the quiet joy in her eyes, the way she would clasp it around her wrist and wear it with pride. But despite the quiet reverence in her gaze, no one came to offer assistance. The store's staff, busy with their regular customers, gave her only fleeting glances. A few glanced at her and quickly turned away, returning to their more worthy clients. Eleanor, for a moment, stood there by the case, hoping someone would approach. But the minutes ticked by, and the indifference of the staff became more palpable. The whispers from the other side of the showroom carried to her ears, and the subtle glances cast her way made her feel as though she were invisible. She was used to it, this kind of dismissal. Throughout her life, Eleanor had often found herself on the periphery, never quite fitting into the molds others expected her to. She had built her wealth over the years, investing wisely, making shrewd decisions in the world of business. But unlike others, she had never cared for outward displays of wealth. She didn't need a mansion or a private jet to prove her worth. She was content with a simple life, a modest home, and a love that ran deep for her family. And yet, in this store, none of that seemed to matter. Eleanor could feel the eyes of the staff on her, sizing her up. Her old coat and worn shoes made her appear out of place. She was clearly not the type of customer they were used to dealing with. She could feel their dismissive glances, the judgment behind their politeness. It was not spoken aloud, but it was there in the way they ignored her. She wasn't important enough. She didn't belong here. It wasn't new to her. The world often treated her as if her value was based solely on her appearance, on how much money she could flaunt. But she had spent her life proving that her worth was not measured by the size of her bank account or the clothes she wore. And yet, standing in this glittering space, she felt small. As she continued to study the bracelet, Eleanor realized that no one would come to her aid. It was clear that the staff had no interest in helping her. They were busy with the more glamorous customers, those who fit the ideal image of wealth and beauty. But Mrs. Palmer was not one to retreat quietly. She had worked too hard for too many years to let a moment of humiliation like this deter her. She would not be dismissed. Not today. Taking a steadying breath, Eleanor stood up straight, her shoulders squared. It was time to take matters into her own hands. Eleanor stood near the display case, her hand hovering over the bracelet she had been admiring. She was lost in thought, imagining how it would look on her granddaughter's wrist. The soft pearls and the golden band seemed to carry a sense of simplicity, a purity that Eleanor cherished. But as her fingers gently traced the glass case, she felt the weight of her own loneliness in the store, the same weight she had often carried throughout her life. The feeling of being out of place was not unfamiliar to her. She had been on the edges of society, unnoticed, for most of her life. But it stung now, more than ever. The staff, though, scattered across the showroom, had yet to approach her. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that someone would take a moment to offer assistance. But as the minutes passed, it became clear they were far too occupied with other customers. Customers who looked more like the type who belonged in a store like this. Well-dressed, polished, exuding the kind of wealth that the store's designers and employees undoubtedly admired. Among them was Tiffany Clark, a young woman with immaculate black hair and an air of self-assuredness that made her seem untouchable. Tiffany's sharp gaze skimmed over Eleanor briefly, her eyes flicking from the elderly woman to a couple entering the store. It was clear where her attention was drawn. She flashed a bright, almost rehearsed smile, immediately diverting her focus to the new arrivals. "Good afternoon," Tiffany greeted the couple, her voice smooth and warm, as if she had just prepared for this encounter all day. Eleanor could hear her voice clearly, full of excitement and energy, as if she was ready to cater to the couple's every whim. Eleanor, still standing in front of the display case, felt the sting of being overlooked. Tiffany had given her no more than a passing glance. She had not even acknowledged her presence. This, Eleanor knew, was not about being busy. It was about something deeper, the assumption that someone like her, with her worn coat and humble demeanor, wasn't a customer worth helping. She shifted slightly, adjusting her grip on her cane, and took a step forward, hoping to catch the attention of someone. The young couple was being treated like royalty. Tiffany was almost fawning over them, offering advice on which diamonds would complement their wardrobe for an upcoming gala. Eleanor had been watching for some time, but it was clear she wasn't even on their radar. Her patience wore thin, but Eleanor had been patient all her life. She had learned not to rush. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer to Tiffany's counter, willing to speak up this time. She wasn't angry, just disappointed, tired of being ignored. She would ask for help once more, and if she wasn't heard, she would find another way to get the assistance she needed. "Excuse me, dear," Eleanor said quietly, but there was an unmistakable firmness in her voice. Tiffany, still absorbed in helping the young couple pick out rings, didn't immediately look up. She gave a half-hearted gesture, as if brushing off a fly. "I'll be with you in just a minute," Tiffany replied dismissively, not even making eye contact with Eleanor. Her attention never wavered from the couple, whose laughter and easy conversation only emphasized Eleanor's solitude. Eleanor, unfazed by the subtle dismissal, decided to wait. She stepped back slightly and looked at a nearby necklace, admiring its design. But the thought of being ignored yet again made her heart sink. She was beginning to feel like a mere shadow in the store, someone who did not belong in this world of polished glass and sparkling jewels. Minutes passed. Tiffany, still immersed in her conversation, didn't even spare a glance for Eleanor, whose presence seemed to have faded entirely into the background. In fact, it was as though she didn't even exist to the young sales assistant. The whispers of the staff, who had no doubt seen Eleanor enter earlier, were now obvious. Quiet murmurings, barely perceptible but enough for Eleanor to catch a few words. "She probably can't afford anything," one of them muttered from across the room. Another laughed quietly. "What's she doing here? Must be a window shopper." The hurt was sharp, though Eleanor had learned to dismiss such comments in the past. She had built her wealth not by showing off or flaunting her riches, but by making careful, thoughtful investments. Yet standing there in the luxury store, she felt her status as a successful businesswoman mean nothing in the eyes of Tiffany and the others. Her modest appearance made her an easy target for judgment, and she was painfully aware of it. But Eleanor did not allow herself to dwell on the stinging words. She had lived a lifetime with people underestimating her. It was a battle she had long ago come to terms with. However, today, at this moment, the feeling of rejection was overwhelming. She had come to this store with a purpose, to find something precious for her granddaughter. But now, she felt as though the store itself, its beauty, its wealth, its exclusivity, was silently rejecting her too. After what felt like an eternity, Tiffany finally finished her conversation with the couple. The woman flashed another bright smile and bid them goodbye, sending them off with a promise to have their rings ready for the next day. The store returned to its calm, quiet atmosphere, but the tension that lingered between Eleanor and Tiffany could not be ignored. Eleanor cleared her throat softly and took a step forward again. This time, Tiffany finally noticed her, though it seemed more out of duty than genuine interest. She looked up, her expression still polite, but clearly irritated at being interrupted. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" she asked, her tone laced with thinly veiled annoyance. "I was hoping to purchase a gift for my granddaughter," Eleanor said, her voice steady, though a hint of frustration lingered. "Could you please show me something that would suit her?" Tiffany's eyes briefly scanned Eleanor's attire before she gave a small, almost imperceptible sigh, clearly irritated by the interruption. She gave her the bare minimum attention, barely suppressing her distaste. "I'm sorry, but we're quite busy today. Perhaps you should come back when we have more time," Tiffany suggested flatly, turning away to assist someone else without a second glance. The dismissal was as final as it was painful. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, her heart heavy with disappointment, but she refused to let the humiliation show. She had been treated like this before, her worth judged by the clothes she wore, the car she drove, the house she lived in. She had never let it defeat her before, and she wouldn't start now. With quiet resolve, Eleanor turned and left the store, her cane tapping lightly on the marble floor, each step carrying the weight of years of silent endurance. She had been dismissed, ignored, and humiliated. But one thing was certain. This would not be the last time the staff of this store would make a mistake about her. The next morning, the air in the luxury jewelry store was still crisp, the morning sun filtering through the tall windows and casting shimmering reflections on the gleaming displays. It was a typical day for the employees, busy, bustling, and filled with the soft hum of quiet conversations and the occasional laughter of well-dressed customers. But there was something different in the atmosphere today, an undercurrent of tension that had yet to be fully understood. As the bell above the door chimed, Mrs. Eleanor Palmer stepped into the store once again. This time, however, she was no longer the quiet, overlooked elderly woman. There was a different kind of energy about her now, quiet but undeniable. Her cane still tapped lightly against the marble floor, but her presence seemed to fill the space with an invisible power. She walked with purpose, each step measured, as if she had come not to shop but to make a statement. Tiffany Clark, who had been straightening up the counter, briefly glanced up from her task. She took in the sight of the woman entering the store and felt a faint flicker of confusion cross her mind. Eleanor, once again wearing her modest coat and simple shoes, did not fit the typical image of the clientele that frequented this high-end boutique. But Tiffany, dismissive as always, turned her attention back to the more stylish customers entering, quickly brushing off the elderly woman's presence. Eleanor, however, was not here to be ignored. She approached the counter, her eyes scanning the store's elegant displays once more. The other employees were too caught up in their own conversations and transactions to notice her at first, but she wasn't there for idle browsing. She had come back to claim what was now hers. As Eleanor reached the counter, Sarah Williams, the manager, noticed her for the first time. Sarah's polite smile faltered as she realized that Eleanor was approaching her directly. Her demeanor was calm, but there was a slight hesitation in her movements. "Can I help you, madam?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with curiosity, though her eyes were still scanning the room, looking for other potential customers to assist. Eleanor didn't waste any time. Without a word, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a set of documents. Sarah took them with a slight frown, wondering what this woman could possibly want with paperwork. Her confusion turned to shock as she unfolded the papers and began to read the contents. Her face slowly drained of color, and her eyes widened with disbelief. What is this?" Sarah's voice faltered, the words barely leaving her lips. She looked up at Eleanor, who stood silently, waiting. Eleanor's expression was calm, almost serene. She held Sarah's gaze with quiet authority, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "I'm not here to buy jewelry, Sarah," she said softly, but her words were as clear as a bell. "I'm here as your new boss." The words landed like a bombshell in the otherwise serene showroom. The chatter and the quiet clink of jewelry being examined fell silent. The other employees, who had been busy with their customers, began to take notice of the exchange. A few heads turned, and whispers started to ripple through the room as the truth of the situation began to sink in. Sarah's face went pale as she processed the reality of what was unfolding before her. She had no idea who this woman truly was. No one in the store had, but now it was painfully clear. Sarah stammered, her voice trembling as she glanced at the papers again. You bought the store?" she asked incredulously, her eyes darting between the document and Eleanor, her mind racing to comprehend what was happening. "This can't be right. This is some kind of mistake." Eleanor's calm demeanor never wavered. "That's correct," she said, her voice firm yet measured. "I've purchased this store. It now belongs to me." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in, and then continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "And I'm here to make some changes." Sarah, still holding the papers, looked up at Eleanor, her mind a swirl of disbelief and confusion. She had no idea who this woman was or how she had come to acquire the store, but one thing was clear. Eleanor was not some confused, elderly woman. She was serious, and she was in control. Around them, the rest of the staff began to shift uncomfortably. The whispers grew louder, and those who had been too busy to notice before now exchanged nervous glances. No one knew quite what to make of the situation. Tiffany, who had been so sure of her superiority the day before, now looked on in wide-eyed shock. Her usual smirk had vanished, replaced by a sense of dread as she slowly took in what was happening. Eleanor turned to address the room, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "Yesterday, I came here as a customer," she began, her eyes scanning the faces of the staff who had dismissed her. "I was looking to buy a gift for my granddaughter, but instead of being treated with respect, I was ignored, judged, and dismissed, simply because of my appearance." She paused for a moment, letting her words hang in the air, before she continued. "You assumed I didn't have the means to purchase anything, that I wasn't worthy of your time. You made a mistake." The tension in the room was palpable. No one dared to speak. No one dared to interrupt. Everyone knew this wasn't just a reprimand. This was something bigger. Eleanor was speaking not just for herself, but for every customer who had been judged or dismissed based on their appearance. She was drawing a line in the sand, and it was clear that things were about to change. "As of today," Eleanor continued, "this store will no longer tolerate arrogance or discrimination of any kind. Every customer who walks through that door, whether they're wearing a designer suit or an old coat like mine, will be treated with the same respect. No one will be dismissed because of their appearance, their age, or their perceived wealth." She turned back to Sarah, who was still reeling from the shock of the revelation. "And that begins with leadership," Eleanor said. "Sarah, you're fired." The room fell silent as the weight of Eleanor's words settled over the staff. Sarah's mouth hung open in disbelief. She had been the manager of this prestigious store, and now in a single moment, she was no longer in charge. She looked at Eleanor, her eyes wide with shock, unable to process what was happening. "You can't be serious," Sarah protested, her voice rising in disbelief. "You're firing me? I've been here for years. This is my store." You've created a toxic environment here, Sarah, Eleanor replied firmly. Your leadership fostered arrogance, and that ends now. The silence in the room deepened as Sarah's face turned crimson. She opened her mouth to protest again, but said nothing. She knew there was no point in arguing. She had been dethroned by the very person she had dismissed the day before. Eleanor's gaze swept the room once more, and she turned her attention to Tiffany. Tiffany Clark, she said, her voice steady and firm. You're next. Tiffany froze. She had been so sure that she was untouchable, that her beauty and confidence would protect her from any consequences. But now, standing before Eleanor, her facade began to crumble. She had judged the elderly woman, assuming she was nothing more than a harmless customer. She had been wrong. Tiffany, Eleanor said again, her voice unwavering, you've shown me exactly the kind of attitude I will no longer tolerate here. Pack your things. Tiffany opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She could see the quiet strength in Eleanor's eyes, and it made her nervous. She swallowed hard and, without a word, walked slowly toward the back office, her head hanging low. As Tiffany disappeared into the back, Eleanor turned to the remaining staff. I'm not just here to punish, she said, her voice softer but still resolute. I'm here to rebuild. We are going to make this place one where every customer is treated with dignity and respect. No exceptions. So, the story of Mrs. Eleanor Palmer comes to an end, but the message it carries will resonate with us for a long time. This story is not just about power or revenge. It's about patience, respect, and how we treat one another. Mrs. Palmer taught us an important lesson. Never judge a person by their appearance, and that everyone deserves respect, regardless of wealth or status. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story. If you found it interesting and inspiring, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to continue bringing meaningful stories. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.